Welcome to RCR Wireless News. I'm Martha DeGrasse, and this is the HetNet Perspectives webinar. I'd like to introduce you to our panelists for today. Philip Sorrells is VP of Strategic Marketing for Wireless at CommScope, one of our sponsors today. Philip, it's great to have you on the webinar.
Thanks so much. It's always great to be with our friends at RCR.
Thank you. And Laith DeHyatt is here. He is Director of Global Wireless Strategy at Accruent, our other sponsor today. Laith, thank you very much for joining the webinar.
Hi, Martha. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
We are too. Also here today is Aaron Blazer, Analyst and VP at Atlantic ACM. Aaron, it's great to have you back.
Hey, Martha. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, and I'm Martha DeGrasse, editor at RCR Wireless News. A brief overview of RCR Wireless. We are a premier news source for the wireless communications industry. We provide carrier, network, handset, and telecom software news. Follow us on the web at rcrwireless.com and on Twitter at RCR Wireless News. I'd also like to call your attention to a feature report on HetNets publishing today on our website. Key takeaways. To date, carriers have deployed indoor DAS to extend network coverage and capacity while using small cells more for discrete specific solutions so far. Customers are often looking for neutral host solutions, even with small cells, and this has in some cases been an impediment to some deployments. The business models for neutral host solutions are still emerging. HetNet deployments can in some ways be more complex than macro site deployments, so service providers that can streamline and track processes have a distinct advantage. And that leads to Accruent, which develops software in this area, and at this time I'm going to turn the presentation over to Laith for a brief introduction to Accruent.
Great, thanks so much, Martha. I'm going to start out by giving you just a brief overview about Accruent as a company, if you want to hit the next slide. Accruent's the largest independent provider of infrastructure, real estate, and maintenance software. Accruent delivers purpose-built software solutions in a number of different industry verticals, including telecommunications, healthcare, retail, and corporate real estate. We were founded in 1995, and we currently have about 500 employees and over 2,100 customers, and those counts are growing every day. We are profitable and private equity backed. We have very strong financial backing by two equity partners, TA Associates and Vista. You want to hit the next slide there,
Ready
Martha?
for the next?
Yeah. So in the telecommunications space, we have very strong market share managing really the entirety of mobile network infrastructure around the world, macro as well as small cell networks. To date, we have over 850,000 cell sites under management in our solutions. We're tracking almost 2 million individual infrastructure projects, and currently we manage about 4 million pieces of equipment and network assets in our solutions. Our flagship product is Cytera. Some of you on the webinar are probably familiar with this tool. Cytera was originally created way back in 2001. It's undergone a lot of change and a lot of evolution over the years, and really in the past almost 4 years since Accruent acquired the Cytera tool and the platform, we've made significant investment, not only adding new capabilities, but also upgrading the infrastructure and the backbone of the tool to really deliver a carrier-grade solution to operators, tower companies, and service providers. We address the entire ecosystem, and more we are building our market share globally in Latin America, Asia, Europe, as well as in North America. And we're going to talk a little bit more about some of our specific solutions related to HetNets and small cell a little bit later in the webinar during the discussion.
All right, great, thank you. We look forward to learning more about software that is part of the HetNet ecosystem. Right now we're going to learn a little bit more about some of the physical layer solutions from our other sponsor, CommScope. I'm going to turn it over to Philip Sorrells for a brief introduction to CommScope before we jump in to our question and answers.
Fantastic. Well, CommScope, our main mission at CommScope is to enable communication. And as you said, Martha, our primary primary way we serve the market is really at the physical layer, and we kind of evolved into three different approaches for providing broadband connectivity. The first area is our wireless division, which hopefully many of you in the audience will recognize as the Andrew brand, one of the more well-known and well-respected brands in the wireless infrastructure equipment. We're a leading provider of all things RF. Certainly microwave backhaul antennas, base station antennas, transmission cable, basically everything that it takes infrastructure-wise to hook a radio up and to provide an air interface to the user. Then our second major segment is really aimed at enterprise data centers and intelligent buildings. This is our enterprise division, and again, our core competencies here are our data center technologies, structured cables technologies, a lot of new and interesting innovations in how we are providing commercial buildings with intelligent ways of managing what happens inside that building. So again, that's a key way that we're providing broadband to the world. And then last but not least, our oldest and probably one of the most associated with the actual CommScope brand, if you have cable TV and you still are using one of the traditional cable providers and you have 75 ohm cable coming into your house, if you live in the U.S., there's a good chance that that piece of cable came from CommScope. Today, we still are a leading provider of RF solutions into that broadband to the home ecosystem, and we also are a leading provider of fiber and other technologies to provide the home with a broadband experience. So in the wireless segment, we're really focused on 5 key areas. One area is network modernizations, how do operators add technology to existing sites. The second area is shaping the airwave. Again, as a leading supplier of antenna technology, we're really focusing on how do you develop antenna technologies that are more precise and put the RF energy where you want it and only where you want it, which is really important for LTE in particular. Of course, our DAS solutions, a leading supply there. A newer initiative in the area of metro cells, which again will play into the overall discussion today. And for the last 60 years, we've been the #1 provider of microwave backhaul solutions in the industry. So that's a good snapshot of what we're doing at CommScope.
That is a very good snapshot. Thank you. And we are going to touch on many of those topics today, starting with indoor DAS, which I think is perhaps the most deployed solution to date for extending network coverage and capacity. Philip, why, in your opinion, has indoor DAS been the preferred solution to date for operators?
Well, certainly if you look at it from a historical perspective and you think about the early days of mobility, the early days had two kind of common threads. One, the frequency bands that were used were typically low band. So in those low band applications, you were able to get a pretty good outside in coverage. And then the second thing is that in most smaller buildings, the outside in coverage was pretty effective. Now, DAS has been the preferred indoor solution for operators to date because most of those ecosystems or applications that needed to be covered were large and complex venues. For example, airports. For example, stadiums, football stadiums or sporting stadiums. So large, complex stadiums where you needed to get coverage in, basic coverage in, just to have a useful user experience. So for those of you in the audience who've ever flown in a plane, which I suspect is most of you, we all know the very first thing we do when we land is we turn on our device and try to find a signal. And of course, all that is really the result today of what's been done historically with making sure good coverage is happening in those types of airport type scenarios. So it's been preferred because it's really been necessary in those type of applications and has been a very effective way for large venues to get multiple operators coverage into those locations.
Okay, great, thank you. And for those of us that have had the opportunity to tour some of these buildings and see these DAS, these distributed antenna systems, we know that it is a very complex undertaking. Like, can you give us some insight about some of the best practices that lead to faster, lower cost deployments that can then go on to scale as needed?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, one thing we've been looking at is, you know, how our customers and ecosystem build out DAS systems versus, you know, traditional macro sites. You know, although, you know, the process and the equipment and the engineering and all the different expertise required are really different between those two deployment models, there are best practices that are actually shared across the two. You know, in particular, the ability to, you know, really drive efficiencies in the different workflows and in the projects that are actually getting executed to both accelerate the timeline of the deployment so you can start monetizing that system, but also managing the quality of those deployments. So what you actually, you know, install and ultimately deploy and deliver to your customers is of a high quality and is sustainable and scalable. You know, we see that, you know, a couple different best practices. One is really leveraging business intelligence and reporting, so you can analyze the data and analyze your workflows to see what's working at the macro and the micro level in your projects and what's not. Are there vendors that are performing or well or underperforming? Are certain projects always behind for specific reasons? The only way to really analyze that quickly and proactively is using business intelligence in your workflows, as well as really standardizing best practices. I mean, it sounds kind of common sense, but, you know, if something's working, if you know the certain way to install something is to do X, you want to be able to standardize that across your operation, particularly if you have multiple deployments happening concurrently. You want to stick with what's working and change what's not working as quickly as possible.
Absolutely. And I do think a lot of these distributed antenna systems may have been installed before LTE was so prevalent and now are needing to be updated to LTE. Philip, can you give us a little bit of insight into that process?
Absolutely. So one thing that's really important for people to just keep in the back of your mind is the difference between 2G and 3G and LTE. And just to simplify it, for the sake of time, I want to just simplify that. So 2G was designed for voice. And the primary quality metric in a 2G voice system was signal strength. So when you design an indoor coverage system for 2G, you designed it to optimize signal strength. LTE is designed for data. It is a data-driven system. It's interference limited. So the primary metric that defines quality in terms of the design process for an in-building DAS system for LTE is SINAR. So given that those two quality measurements are different parameters, then you have to really think through how do you select the right kind of equipment and how do you place that equipment in the right place to optimize for SINAR as opposed to optimizing for signal strength. Now what that practically means is think smaller sectors. Think tighter sectors where you have less energy overlapping from one sector to the next. Think about other ways that you find and eliminate sources of interference. In particular, passive intermods in an LTE network can be quite a challenge to that data throughput rate. So we recently, for example, announced a whole new line of passives for DAS systems, passive devices for DAS systems that have a brand new PIM specification to improve that quality experience. So really the bottom line is it's about making that shift from designing for signal strength to designing for optimizing for SINAR and using the right approaches to reduce interference.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Now we need to give a brief overview of carrier DAS versus neutral host DAS. I think that a lot of venue owners are getting more interested in neutral host DAS because this can support people that come into the venue no matter, or even if they're on different carriers. Maybe not all carriers are supported, but maybe at least AT&T and Verizon can be supported. And Aaron, I know that you spend a lot of time thinking about this and looking at these different business models. Can you just give us a brief overview of carrier DAS versus neutral host DAS?
So basically, the neutral host DAS model follows a multi-tenant model, which allows for multiple carriers to share the same equipment and ecosystem, and really only requires a venue to do a single deployment, whereas some venues today you will have multiple deployments as individual carriers have done their own deployments within a venue. So neutral host, you also technically tend to have a third-party manager, which tends to be more of a tower-like model as far as a third-party deployment partner there that is in charge of deploying and then managing the system within a given building. We see this heavily done within large sports stadiums today, retail shopping centers, and other areas like that where the real estate entity would love to have a single entity to work with from a deployment perspective.
Okay, great, thanks. But there are some added challenges that you sort of alluded to. Laith, can you give us a little bit of an overview of the added challenges when it's a neutral host system?
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of our experience, with Cytera is around some of the big tower companies that are building out neutral host systems and leasing out the space. And really, what we see are there's a lot of the similar challenges they face on their other assets. It's being able to effectively track, their depreciable and non-depreciable assets at the venue. Managing proactive and reactive maintenance to ensure that they're delivering a high-quality product, but also maximizing their revenue captured. Balancing those costs to the revenue and ultimately the profitability of that deployment, which is what they're really keyed in on. Who's paying me for what per site, and how can I maximize revenue and profitability while still maintaining a high quality of service. And then again, going back to the whole idea of reporting and business intelligence, they want to be able to compare performance of one implementation to another, so they can stick with what's working and try to maximize the profitability.
Okay, great. Thank you. And the picture we're looking at is the University of Phoenix Stadium, which is the site of the upcoming Super Bowl. And I believe that's a Crown Castle DAS system there. Now that most of the large venues in the U.S. have at least started down the path of a distributed antenna system, Philip, what do you think the outlook is? Do you think we'll continue to see as much activity with DAS?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I think we'll continue to see possibly even more. What's happening now, though, is that it's just like it is in the macro network. The original aim is to get basic coverage, and then we start to build in capacity layers. And what we're seeing now is a lot of these large venues have basic coverage and pretty good capacity in place now, are adding capacity. And again, it's that LTE thing that's really got people working hard to figure out how to scale capacity. And to be honest with you, I don't think anybody really has that down to a science, because every time we think we have modeled what capacity is needed, guess what? A new application comes out that takes even more capacity from the network. So we're really working on capacity scaling now. And of course, the applications are starting to segue. So we're seeing a lot of segue now of these applications into more enterprise type buildings. Certainly, super high rises and that type of thing have been a natural area for DAS for a long time. But now we're starting to see more segue into enterprise type buildings and locations. Again, at CTIA this year, we announced our new I&E platform, which is really aimed at that kind of application. We've announced that out there for operator trials, and we think it will continue to let this type of solution be carried out through a lot of building types that don't have any current mobility coverage.
Right, and we think that there are a lot of buildings out there that have not been covered yet and that will want to be covered. Aaron, I think you have some statistics on DAS coverage and the outlook as well.
Yeah, I think so. We've heard just anecdotally over the last year that only about sort of 15% of eligible facilities in the U.S. have been covered by DAS. So there are a large number of venues out there that really have yet to get the coverage that they need from an indoor perspective. I mean, folks have definitely tackled the low-hanging fruit, which tends to be things like sports stadiums, where today any Major League Baseball, NHL, NFL stadium out there, they've definitely undertaken a DAS deployment, but there are plenty of other large-scale, million-square-foot plus venues that really could benefit from these indoor deployments. And I think the biggest issue tends to be for whether it be a neutral host or a carrier for getting the cost metrics in line. When it comes to neutral host, it's really getting those multiple tenants lined up in a similar time frame to do a deployment, because the last thing they want to do is do a deployment to a single tenant network and then have to come back in and re-architect the equipment or upgrade the equipment to meet that multi-tenant requirement when those other carriers decide to come on board.
Now, when it's not such a huge venue, I'm guessing that the different tenants would all be interested in basically the same nodes, right? So that's got to streamline things a little bit, right?
Yeah, but the problem is once you get to smaller tenants, all the same carriers may not even be interested in the same venue at the same time. When we talk to neutral host builders, one of the biggest things they say is, I have this huge portfolio of potential facilities to deploy in, but I have Sprint's interest in facility A, Verizon in facility B, and AT&T in facility C, and I can't get those three to agree on one venue at the same time at this point. So a sports stadium is easy to make the case of doing that neutral host deployment, because every carrier is going to has that traffic problem most likely in that facility. But in these other large-scale facilities, you may not have the scale of needs among a deep set of carriers that you would in some of these more sort of diverse environments, I guess.
Okay, that's interesting. Thanks. And then as we move on to outdoor DAS, I'm sure there are some places that more than one carrier would be interested in, but we haven't seen quite as much traction so far with outdoor DAS as with indoor. Aaron, can you speak a little bit about some of the challenges associated with outdoor DAS?
Yeah. I think the multi-tenant model for outdoor DAS is very hard for carriers to swallow, but we do see single carrier deployments coming into vogue. Crown Castle, of course, with its acquisition of NextG, is making a huge play in the outdoor DAS space and has really taken on with, I think, 13,000 plus nodes out there today, whether it be small cell or DAS. So there's a little bit of a fudge in that number, but they're definitely pursuing that space heavily. When it comes down to impediments, there are all the traditional outdoor network impediments that you would run into, whether it be site acquisition, so where can you attach your nodes? That tends to be a big problem, as you need to obviously have these in dispersed, very specific geographical areas. The other issue is backhaul and backhauling traffic back to the DAS hub. So really getting that fiber in the ground to bring things back to the hub tends to be another issue that folks run into. Similarly, on the outdoor small cell front, you have the backhaul issue too, although there are some alternative ways to solve it there. So really the traditional outdoor problems of outdoor networking in general are probably the biggest issues when it comes to DAS.
Okay, great. Thank you. Now, Philip, I know that you deal with these issues in your work. Can you give us a little bit of insight about whether you see outdoor DAS being broadly deployed or more of a niche application so far?
Well, I would agree with Aaron that there's a model out there. Outdoor DAS makes a lot of sense when depending on the topology and the area that you're going into, and the desire to have multiple technologies, multiple bands. So, for example, if in an outdoor area you want to be able to do 2G and 3G and 4G, and you want to launch all your different spectrums, then the outdoor DAS applications are really a pretty good way to go. And of course, if it's multi-operator and you can find a good neutral host solution for that, then it really makes a lot of sense. But what we see is that for the most part, used more as a niche application today in a lot of cases. There's, at least in the U.S. today, the macro coverage to a lot of outside sites is pretty good. So there's not just a huge drumbeat to go really do that. The bigger focus is inside. So today it certainly is a very valuable tool, and as Aaron alluded to, it's really been deployed in a couple areas very broadly. But it's more of a niche application that we aim very specific things at to help solve those problems. I'd also add to the challenges besides site acquisition and backhaul. There's always a challenge with power, and how do you get power to a small cell node or even to an outdoor DAS? And the last thing is, if you're going to spend even a little bit of time and money to put in a node, the performance, the RF performance, really has to be considered. You know, as you add anything into a network, you've got to think about how it hands off, where it creates interference, how it manages interference, and all the parameters. So it's not just the ability to get it there, it's the question of, once you have it there, was it worth the time, money, and effort?
Right. Well, let's talk for just a minute about power, since you brought it up. Are you seeing any new solutions that you think might make a difference?
Well, I would say that most of the power things that we're seeing out there are pretty well known, and I wouldn't say that I've seen anything that's like breakout, brand new approaches. There's obviously the challenge is, how do you scale it? How do you package it so that it can be used in an outdoor ecosystem in a small cell? So there's some things that are being done to help make sure that, if, for example, if you do want battery backups or some other backup, that it can be packaged in a small way. But I wouldn't say there's anything that's really jumping off at the top of my head about power that's new or unique.
So it's really just more about planning ahead.
Right.
Okay, well, we are going to move on in a minute and talk about small cells, but before we do that, we did want to give everybody an overview of some of the major players in the DAS market. This research is from ABI, and there's a lot of research out there, so some of the companies may see themselves a little differently than they appear in this chart, but this is one firm's an analysis, and we do think that it covers most of the major players, so we did want to share it with the audience today. I also want to take this time to let everyone know that we will try to take audience questions at the end of the webinar, so if you do have questions, please type them in to your GoToWebinar control panel, and we will try to get to at least a couple of those before the end. So at this time, we are going to move on to small cells, starting with indoor. Laith, can you start us off with some of the specific challenges associated with indoor small cell deployments?
Yeah, absolutely. And really, what we see with our partners and customers are, they're really trying to be proactive and thinking ahead about kind of the maintenance and the upkeep and the scalability of these deployments. And really, the biggest issues we see are with actually tracking of the individual assets and being able to store and deliver detailed information about where they are. Right? If you think about a skyscraper, a high-rise building, you potentially have upwards of 100 or more of these individual indoor pico or femto cells in these buildings. So having very detailed information about what's deployed where, down to specific room numbers, floors, areas of the building. Lat and long obviously just doesn't cut it with a large indoor deployment. And then being able to deliver that information in a mobile fashion to field crews out potentially in the building, either installing or maintaining these small cells. It's a huge challenge to our customers. That's a lot of what we're seeing. Besides some of the other issues, I think the other panelists will discuss.
Right. So having that mobile app really helps them, I'm guessing.
Yeah, absolutely. You have a pretty large vendor ecosystem and service providers out in the field, potentially installing and servicing some of these indoor small cells. So having a single system of record where the information can also be accessed via some sort of mobile device, whether it's a tablet or a Android or iPhone, we've found is key, and our customers are getting huge value out of that.
Okay, great. And since we are talking about small cells, this is a great time to introduce a new guest who's just joined us. Rupert Baines joined from the UK. He is CMO of Real Wireless. Rupert, we are so glad that you were able to join us today. Thank you for being on the webinar. Can you hear us? Rupert?
Hello, thanks very much. Can you hear me?
Thank you for joining us. We're sorry that you were delayed.
Yeah, sorry about that. It's an important subject and some very interesting presenters, so looking forward to participating.
Well, we're glad that you're here, and we would like to hear your thoughts on the specific challenges associated with indoor small cell deployments.
I think yeah, very similar to, well, there's an interesting, I think, some of the challenges of outdoor deployments, connectivity, as we were just hearing, power, backhaul, siting, in some cases are also challenges for indoor deployments. If we're talking about a shopping mall or an airport, then where can you put sites? Where do you have access? Can you get power? Can you get backhaul? Are still issues in some cases. In an office or an enterprise, of course, they can be much easier, much simpler. There will often be Wi-Fi already laid out. Perhaps surprisingly, I think one of the biggest challenges for indoor deployments is sort of whose responsibility is it? And you will often get many parties involved, and you might have a building tenant, be it a retailer or a company who wants better coverage. Then you might have an operator who has to install the cells and perhaps pay for them, and it's their spectrum. And are they happy to do this? Reluctant to do this? Do they want to make money out of it? And then you might have a landlord or a facilities company or building owners in different forms who pose complications. So I think the biggest issue in building deployments is often who benefits, who pays, and who's involved, more than any technical issues.
Yes, we've heard that as well. Now, once an enterprise does make the leap and decide to commit to a small cell installation, we are also hearing a lot about self-organizing networks as a big benefit. Can you give us a little information, Philip? I know you have some experience in this area. People may not really know what self-organizing networks are.
Sure.
Yes.
If you,
I'm sorry,
Yep.
Philip, did you go ahead?
Yeah, this is Philip. So the concept of self-optimizing networks has been around for quite a while, and really the concept has got three kind of key parameters to it, and it's one parameter is around power and power levels. Another parameter is around RF and how the RF is applied into the ecosystem, and then the last one, which is where there's a lot of smaller tentacles of information, is things like parameters. So neighbor parameters, radio parameters, radio settings, handoff parameters, all the kind of that interaction stuff that goes on. Especially in the small cell and the indoor, the small cell and the HetNet, in my mind, the challenge for the HetNet to really work is that whole area of how you control the management layer between the small cells in the HetNet and the macro layers, between the macro layers to other macro layers, and between small cells to other small cells. So that whole management layer of how you manage interferers, how do you manage handoffs, how do you make sure that radio parameters are set up so that you're making the most efficient use of your frequencies that you have allocated, all that stuff is really a critical part to the entire HetNet ecosystem really coming into play. So it's a very important challenge in front of, at least in front of the technical aspects of how to make the whole thing really work.
And can you share a little bit of information about where this software sits in the network? Is it device? Is it in the network? Where is the software?
It really depends. What we're seeing in the macro layer, it's an add-on that some of the radio OEMs bring in as an add-on. Some of the operators are adding that as an application at the operator level that would fit into their control networks. It's being, for example, inside our next generation IoT platform, we have our own little version of a self-contained Optison type system that really talks about controlling power and setups and frequencies between the various interface modules that we have in that particular platform. So it really depends on the application. It's being deployed in multiple different ways.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, one other thing that we're hearing about small cells is that enterprises often expect a neutral host solution because maybe they have experience with DAS or with Wi-Fi. Small cells obviously are one carrier now. Rupert, do you have any perspective on whether we might see this start to change? I think that we're hearing that it would be a long time before there might actually be a small cell that supported more than one service provider. Would you agree with that?
I would. I think that's one of the big differences between small cells and DAS. There's pros and cons in different directions, there's different economics, but one of the clear advantages of DAS is it lends itself very well to a neutral host multi-operator architecture, as small cells really are an extension of an operator's network that intimately tied into one particular operator. Going back to something I was saying before about the interactions between who does things, that's actually an interesting difference between the European market and the US. That in the US, neutral host is a much bigger part of the market. There are neutral host companies, there are building organisers, building owners who are familiar with dealing with neutral hosts. And because of that, DAS has a bigger role in the US, whereas in Europe, there's fewer neutral host operations, and perhaps surprisingly, DAS operations that are here, some of them are single operator. So there's an interesting market difference between the two markets.
That is interesting. Thank you very much for sharing that. And finally, Aaron, can you talk a little bit about integrated Wi-Fi? I know that in the past 6 weeks, we've seen several new small cells hit the market that do integrate Wi-Fi. Is this becoming table stakes now for these indoor small cells?
I think you're seeing Wi-Fi play a little bit of a different role. What we've seen is some movement on the consumer end of things with sort of the femtocell business and deployments at home with, I think, some of the moves T-Mobile announced they're going to make in the U.S. And there's a lot of discussion around Wi-Fi calling and offloading of voice traffic to Wi-Fi enabled voice solutions, as well as, Wi-Fi traditionally, it's not a carrier grade network solution. So Wi-Fi is regarded as a great solution for offloading your web traffic in, for instance, a corporate environment where you're not running mission critical applications over it, but you are sort of enabling that web experience for your employees over that Wi-Fi network, and your small cell network may be able to support things like RCS or sort of enriched carrier-driven sort of call flow or traffic models that are happening over the carrier-grade network. So that demarcation may create a need and increase deployment of these sort of these sort of integrated models when it comes down to it in the future here.
Okay, great, thank you. And we will try to talk a little bit more about Wi-Fi in a few minutes. But we're going to switch over right now and talk about outdoor small cells. This is a picture of one of CommScope's outdoor small cell deployments. And Laith, I'd like to ask you actually to give us a brief overview of some of the specific requirements. You've given us some great insight on the indoor small cell challenges. Are there any differences when it comes to small cell outdoor deployments?
Yeah, I think some of the other panelists touched on a lot of the same challenges and requirements for our for a small cell are the same for a macro. You're going to have the power, you're going to have the backhaul, zoning and compliance and all those kinds of regulation challenges as well. I think in a lot of cases they're amplified for an outdoor small cell, particularly around the obvious radio frequency dependencies between the pre-existing macro network in the immediate area versus any sort of infill outdoor small cells an operator might be trying to deploy. But something else that we're seeing, particularly with our operator partners, is other dependencies that are kind of overlooked. So in a very, very localized area, you can have overlap of concurrent projects going on between a small cell and a macro cell that it's related to. You could have shared project workflows, shared ownership from a maintenance perspective, from a field crew perspective, or a project manager perspective. So you tend to get a lot of these unexpected interdependencies between work on an outdoor small cell as well as work on a very nearby macro cell. The other thing we're tending to see is a lot of the best practices and standardizations aren't really well defined. I think carriers as well as their service provider partners are still trying to figure out what works and what sticks. I think we're seeing a lot of different sort of deployment models and financial models around deploying the different types of outdoor small cell technology. So I think it's still a little bit of a work in progress from a certain perspective.
Okay, great, thank you. And we should talk a bit about wireless backhaul. I think that is emerging as an alternative to fiber. We saw Alcatel-Lucent with an announcement there this week. Philip, what are your thoughts on wireless backhaul?
Well, before I give you my thoughts on wireless backhaul, let me just correct something you said about this picture. That's not actually a CommScope small cell. That's a picture of a small cell that we were, or a small cell that we were involved in. My team, for some reason, gave the most complicated-looking picture we could find, but it really does illustrate some of the points that Leif was making earlier that about complexities, and certainly in an outdoor construction, you never really know what you're going to run into. And again, going all the way back to what I said earlier about LTE. LTE is a interference limited system, and the reason a lot of these deployments are being built is to add density for LTE. So you can imagine in an application like this where you have a lot of other wires and things that are in the environment, the quality of the deployment really has to be closely looked at. Now, as far as backhaul, certainly what we're seeing two things that are happening. One thing is we clearly see a trend toward fiber for these small cells. If you have fiber and it's readily accessible, then that's the way to go. But if you're in an outdoor situation like this, that last 10 feet to your pole or to your monopole or to whatever you're mounting that small cell on, that could be in a historical downtown area where you have to break concrete. Yeah. And that is not easy to get done. So there's certain applications where getting that fiber the last 10 feet or the last foot can be an overwhelming challenge. Maybe not completely overwhelming, but could be cost prohibitive or time sensitive or a lot of things just to get that last bit there. So that's a challenge. The other thing that we are starting to hear people talk about, and this is at the beginning edge of what I think we'll hear more and more about as we go through time, is redundancy. In backhaul, a key parameter of any good high-quality backhaul is availability, system availability. When you have a glitch in your backhaul system, it really affects the overall performance of the network. So we're hearing some discussions about the need to have redundant backhaul, where you have fiber, which could be possibly, there's some risk with having fiber in these outdoor sites. There's people that, because they're outside and they may not always be able to be physically as secured as you would like them to be. They're at ground level. They're not physically secured, so you could have tampering, other types of things that could happen. There's some discussion about the need to have a two-layer backup redundancy system for backhaul, and we think that may be an area where wireless applications will be valuable.
Yeah, it sounds like definitely. Aaron, what are you hearing about wireless backhaul? I know you've done some research in this area.
Yeah, so we've done some research and done some surveys of wireless operators in the U.S. around outdoor small cell backhaul, and just echoing what Philip said earlier, really, there's fiber available, fiber is going to be used. We find that people are interested in either dark fiber or some carrier-provided service like a dedicated Ethernet or switched Ethernet solution if fiber is available. So when fiber is not available, though, the next most popular thing is a wireless type solution, but that only represents about 13% of all small cell backhaul spend or expected small cell backhaul spend among wireless operators. So it's a service that they view as sort of that alternative there. Now there are some issues. You have vendors out there pitching non-line of sight solutions, and I think a lot of the operators, when you talk to them, will say, well, non-line of sight hasn't been proven yet, and they're still sort of a little worried on the technology aspects of non-line of sight technologies. And on the microwave side of things, there's again the engineering of whatever the attachment infrastructure is to make sure it can support the addition of the microwave radios or antennas there. So again, those two issues tend to either technology, comfortability with technology, or the actual aspect of having to attach something else to whatever that site is you're attaching that small cell radio to or antenna to already, really plays into a role of holding some of these wireless-oriented backhaul technologies back from adoption, we think, as well in the long term.
Okay, great, thanks. Does anybody have anything else to add on backhaul before we move on to talk about Wi-Fi offload? Okay. All right, great. So Wi-Fi offload is something that we've heard a lot more about recently. T-Mobile in particular has been very active in this area. Aaron, can you give us an overview of what carriers are doing in this area and what you're expecting to see?
Yeah, I think we're seeing, one, from a service perspective, we're seeing a lot of focus played around or turn to Wi-Fi and Wi-Fi integration into devices. Wi-Fi has always played a role as an offload technology with home end user networks. I think Wi-Fi supports something like 70% of data traffic today in the U.S. So I mean, it's already supporting a huge chunk of usage that's out there. And so what we're seeing is Wi-Fi take on a role in supporting calling and voice call enablement, and then with that, we're seeing carriers begin to look at sort of integration of Wi-Fi capacity into different types of CPE equipment that they're deploying in consumers' homes, whether it be cable companies with their broadband modems that hold Wi-Fi hotspot technology, or whether it be a femtocell that also has an integrated Wi-Fi functionality into it. Their carriers are beginning to realize that they can have a presence within the consumer home and really deploy these broader-based Wi-Fi networks to offload a good amount of an increased amount of traffic at the end of the day over a not carrier-grade network, but really improve that overall experience at the end of the day.
And what about the cable companies? They've also been very active with Wi-Fi offload, right?
Yeah, cable is
really.
Yeah, cable has been very, very active in the U.S. in the Wi-Fi space. You've seen the likes of Comcast, Time Warner, Cablevision, all actively deploying Wi-Fi hotspots throughout their metro network, as well as some of the at-home router technologies that enable sort of residential deployments to enable sort of broader penetration of Wi-Fi and broader availability of Wi-Fi. And to really, cable has failed to get a good entry play into the sort of more cellular-oriented networking technology space. You know, there have been number of partnerships over the years that have failed. Cable providers were, of course, investors in Clearwire and lost a good deal on that play. So I think what you're seeing is not a cable effort to launch into the mobile ecosystem, but an effort to really get a presence and get an enablement placement on a device, on the device side of things. So if they're enabling that mobile device to work, they can also then put apps on that device and really enable their full mobile experience without being the actual service provider for that mobile service or mobile device.
Right, and I think that they may become even more active in this area and maybe even try to launch mobile service in the future. Rupert, are you hearing anything about that, or do you have any thoughts about the cable companies getting more active through Wi-Fi?
I think that's been very much a trend, both in the US and throughout the rest of the world. Well, in the UK, for example, Virgin are deploying massive numbers of carrier Wi-Fi, metro Wi-Fi deployments, including the ones on the London Underground system, for example. Virgin now being part of Liberty, but I think it's a very obvious step for them, and I think what's going to be more interesting, back to what we were talking about, is the intersection between carrier Wi-Fi and small cells, and where does that lead the cable companies in the future? Are they going to be doing more alliances? Are we going to see joint rollouts and partnerships as people take advantage of this? But I think Wi-Fi offload and carrier Wi-Fi is a very, very major part of access everywhere in the world, and cable companies are leaders in doing that.
And I'm curious, Philip, when you talk to the carrier service providers, do you see an increasing interest in the intersection between carrier Wi-Fi and small cells? Do you hear about that?
Yeah, we do. I think every operator is interested in how to get more spectrum, and how to get and obviously that means how they can offload capacity. So yeah, there's a lot of discussion about carrier Wi-Fi and what the implications are. There's even some discussions about some carrier aggregation, for example, being done with unlicensed bands that could affect how Wi-Fi is deployed altogether. So yeah, we see a lot of interest in the area. I think there's still a lot of more traditional thinking of get the Wi-Fi into place, use it for offload. There's still some technical challenges related to how they actually can be synergistic in the future. So I think a lot of that's still in front of us.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, we have had some questions from the audience, and we are running low on time, so we are going to try to distribute those to our panelists and do our best to get those answered offline. At this time, we are near the bottom of the hour, and we are going to need to wrap up the webinar with closing comments from our guests. Philip Sorrells, VP of Strategic Marketing for Wireless at CommScope, thank you very much for being here today. Do you have anything to share before we finish?
Well, first off, it was a pleasure, as always, speaking with our RCR and with the other panelists today. I appreciate all the comments that were made. I would say that my biggest closing comment here is that, to me, the important thing in this conversation is to not get locked into any specific tool. I think it's important for us as an industry to advocate to the operator communities who are really trying to solve this problem, to look at all the tools, look at the applications, look at the way the technology is evolving, and really look at how we can find the right tool for the right application at the right time. It just seems to me there's going to be plenty of opportunities for a lot of different applications, and we really need to have even more collaboration. We certainly have a lot now, but we need even more collaboration going forward.
Right. Well, this is a very collaborative industry. Thank you very much. Laith DeHyatt, Director of Global Wireless Strategy at Accruent, thank you very much for sharing your insights about the processes and the software. Do you have any closing comments?
Thank you so much. Yeah, just to kind of add on to what Philip said, I think we're, as everybody's probably aware, we're really just hitting the tip of the iceberg in the U.S. and, and particularly abroad of the capacity and the bandwidth demand and the challenges we're going to face for coverage and capacity. So, the collaboration and innovation for new technology and new solutions are going to be key to keep up with this, the massive demand for data.
Right. All right. And Aaron Blazer, it's always good to have you on the programs. VP at Atlantic ACM, do you have anything to share before we finish?
Yeah, Martha, thank you for the opportunity again. It's always a pleasure to work with RCR and discuss different market trends and changes in the ecosystem. I think from our perspective, it's a matter of economics and really getting the economics right. And what Philip said really, I think, can be taken to heart there, because really it's a matter of not getting locked in on a single solution to make those economics work. So we hear providers out there in the ecosystem really talking today about anything and everything being up for grabs in order to make these cost models work, to make these deployments possible, because at the end of the day, it all boils down to the network experience, as has been proven time and time again. If your network is, if not on par with or better than the other operators out there, your customers are going to feel that pain, and that's going to hit your bottom line. So really keeping your eyes and your ears open and really evaluating all those different scenarios and opportunities out there is really critical, and really critical to making that economic model work.
Absolutely. Thank you. And small cell expert Rupert Baines at Real Wireless, thank you very much for joining us at the last minute. I'm sorry we take your name off the slide when you weren't here at the beginning, but we're glad that you made it, and we'd like to hear any closing comments that you have.
I think similar to the other comments, I think traffic growth continues to increase as more people get LTE rolling out. That's, if anything, going to accelerate, and carriers need to be prepared for that. The tools do exist for it, whether it be Wi-Fi, DAS, small cells. The tools are now there, and carriers really do need to be starting to see these as a competitive edge. There are some operators who are starting to use the availability of these products to deliver better service, improve customer satisfaction, and win business. And I think the opportunity is there, but there's also the threat for people who are not keeping up with these trends.
Right, we do. Everyone needs to stay on their toes. Well, thank you very much, Rupert. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And this will